Welcome back to the APAICS Energy Summit. I'm Madeline Milka, President and CEO of APAICS. I'd like to introduce our first speaker for this panel, Senator Cortez-Masto of Nevada. She is the co-sponsor of the Clean Energy for America Act, a bill that will measurably reduce carbon pollution over the next decade through a series of incentives for clean energy and the promotion of new technologies in the private sector. In an effort to spur Nevada's renewable energy development and production, the senator co-sponsored legislation called the Electric Cars Act to encourage the use and development of electric vehicles, the GEO Act to promote the growth of geothermal energy, especially in the state of Nevada, and the Renewable Energy Extension Act to extend clear energy tax incentives and ensure continued deployment, growth, and innovation of green technologies. Additionally, she sits on the Committee on Energy and Natural Resources and currently serves as the chair of the Energy and Natural Resources Committee's Public Lands, Forests, and Mining Subcommittee. Please welcome Senator Cortez-Masto.
Hi, this is U.S. Senator Catherine Cortez-Masto from Nevada. We're feeling the impacts of climate change all over the world. And I know that Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander communities are some of the hardest hit. It's critical that we work together to combat this crisis. One of the ways we're doing that is through investing in electric vehicles and buses. Transportation is our top emitter of greenhouse gases, so cleaner transportation opportunities are critical to combating climate change, and they're creating good-paying jobs in states across the country. My state of Nevada has been a leader in this space, leaning into the technology of the 21st century as part of my Innovation State Initiative. Electric vehicles are benefiting Nevada's environment, boosting our economy, and creating new jobs. I want to make sure the rest of the country is benefiting as well. I recently attended the unveiling of the first hydrogen fuel cell buses in Southern Nevada, and we're just getting started. Earlier in the year, I was excited to announce a federal grant for 25 electric clean school buses. And I was recently in Reno to retire their last diesel bus. When we passed the bipartisan infrastructure law, I made sure it included my bill to develop a commission and national strategy on electric vehicles. And I'm going to continue working to support cleaner and smarter transportation in my state and across the country so we can keep up the fight against climate change. So now, I am pleased to introduce today's panel on sustainable transportation options for the future. Enjoy the rest of your summit.
I would now like to introduce Congresswoman Debbie Dingell, who represents Michigan's 6th Congressional District in the United States House of Representatives. She is a member of the Energy and Commerce Committee and the Natural Resources Committee, where she leads on critical issues including affordable and accessible health care, clean energy and water, domestic manufacturing and supply chain resilience, and protecting our wildlife and natural resources. Growing up in Michigan, Congresswoman Dingell, who chairs the Great Lakes Task Force, has always been an advocate for the outdoors and commits her work in Congress to protecting the environment for generations. This is most evident in her work to strengthen the American auto industry, maintaining America's competitiveness and ensuring good-paying American jobs. In 2021, she worked together with the White House, the auto industry, the auto workers, and environmentalists to announce the Biden administration's goal of having 50% of new vehicles sold in 2030 be zero-emissions vehicles. Let's give a warm welcome to Congresswoman Dingell.
Hi, everyone. It's Congresswoman Debbie Dingell from Michigan's 6th District. I wish I was there in person, but I am honored to join you for APAICS Energy and Sustainability Summit and to introduce this panel, Sustainable Transportation Options for the Future. I'm a car girl, and the auto industry is at an inflection point as we decide where, how, and by whom electric vehicles, chargers, and batteries are going to be built. It's critical that we invest in the research and development of these technologies here in this country to stay at the forefront of innovation and technology and remain competitive and maintain our role as a global leader in innovation. As passenger vehicles and commercial trucks are becoming safer, smarter, and cleaner, we need to ensure that we as a country are meeting this moment. We must be intentional. The historic investments in the bipartisan infrastructure law for EV charging infrastructure and critical mineral supplies were absolutely critical and necessary for battery components, materials, and recycling. And as a next step, are important to our national, economic, and environmental security. We cannot cede our leadership, as I keep saying. We must manufacture these technologies here at home with our strong environmental and labor standards and American jobs. The transportation sector accounts for nearly 30% of our country's total greenhouse gas emissions. And we know that the dangers that this poses to pollution and poor air quality disproportionately impact communities of color and historically underserved populations. The transition to electric vehicles is critical to reaching our climate and environmental justice goals. The American auto industry has made major advancements in fuel efficiency technologies in the last decade, and they're committed to staying at the forefront. We must work together to ensure we continue to lead the world in vehicle innovation as we make this shift towards a net zero transportation sector. Our vehicles of the future will only be as good as our infrastructure of the future. That's, my friends, why this matters so greatly. We must continue to bring down the cost of electric vehicles so that everybody can afford them, to make sure they're accessible to all Americans, not just the few that can afford them. And we've got to upgrade our power grid to make sure we can sustain it. But then we need to make sure that everybody's got access to EV charging. 50% of the homes in this country don't have garages. And we have to make sure we're doing what we need to do so that we have a charging network nationwide to support the widespread implementation of electric vehicles. And by the way, electric vehicles aren't the only future technology. We need to be studying other ones. We also need to ensure that our roads are fit for the safe deployment of autonomous vehicles, electrically powered vehicles, or hydrogen vehicles, whatever the technology is of the future. We have the power, we have the ability to decrease roadway fatalities and expand mobility solutions to seniors and the disabled. Only by encouraging all stakeholders, making bold investments, and working across the aisle to get the necessary policies right, can we support the safe deployment of AVs while ensuring America leads the world in the development of game-changing technology. I'm looking forward to continuing to engage with you as we tackle these critical challenges. They're important challenges. They're hard, but we have to do it for the future.
Hello, I'm Federal Highway Administrator Shailen Bhatt. On behalf of Secretary Pete Buttigieg, the U.S. Department of Transportation, and the Federal Highway Administration, I'd like to thank the Asian Pacific American Institute for Congressional Studies for organizing the Energy and Sustainability Summit and everyone taking part in this discussion about sustainable transportation options for the future. At USDOT, we are committed to building a modern, sustainable transportation system that is safe, resilient, and more connected to better serve all Americans for generations to come. We know that the U.S. transportation sector is responsible for more greenhouse gas emissions than any other sector of our economy, accounting for 30% of emissions in the United States. At the same time, we recognize that the transportation sector has a big role to play in being part of the solution to the climate crisis. And in the process, we can build a transportation system that is cleaner, more sustainable, and works better for everyone. Thanks to historic levels of funding from President Biden's bipartisan infrastructure law, we have new resources and funding available to help us do just that. This administration's comprehensive approach to tackling climate change provides states with access to more than $27 billion in funding from the bipartisan infrastructure law for a range of greenhouse gas reduction strategies. This includes $7.5 billion in funding for new investments in electric vehicle charging infrastructure through the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure, or NEVI formula program, and Charging and Fueling Infrastructure, CFI competitive grant programs to deploy EV charging and other fueling infrastructure in communities, an important step towards making electric vehicles charging accessible to all Americans. Additional funding is available to help states and local governments carry out a range of environmentally friendly pedestrian and bicycle infrastructure projects and other projects to reduce carbon emissions from on-road highway sources and advance innovative multimodal solutions to reduce congestion and related environmental impacts in the most congested metropolitan areas of the U.S. The Biden-Harris administration also announced a $20 billion competition to capitalize a clean energy financing network that will massively expand investment in new projects that reduce pollution across the country. The funding is part of the Environmental Protection Agency's Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, a first of its kind and national-scale $27 billion competition funded through President Biden's Inflation Reduction Act to combat the climate crisis by catalyzing public and private capital for projects that slash harmful climate pollution in communities across the country, especially underserved communities, all while lowering energy costs for families and creating good-paying jobs. Through all of these efforts, we are building a 21st century transportation system that is safe, resilient, and more connected for the millions of Americans who use our transportation system every day. The work we're all doing at the federal level represents a whole-of-government approach that is complemented by the efforts of states, local governments, private industry, and stakeholders like you who are committed to helping us tackle the climate crisis. Thank you for inviting me to be part of this summit, and rest assured the U.S. Department of Transportation will continue to work closely with our partners across the country to build a safer and more sustainable transportation system for everyone. Thank you so much.
Our next speaker is Jose Mercado, a seasoned government affairs professional working as Doordash's manager for federal government relations, where he leads the company's engagement with federal Democratic lawmakers. Before joining Doordash, Jose worked as a lobbyist representing various clients, including Doordash, on Capitol Hill. He started his career in public service as a Congressional Hispanic Caucus Institute Fellow, where he advised United States Senator Bob Menendez on Latino affairs as his Congressional Hispanic Caucus liaison. In his free time, he serves on the executive committee of the Hispanic Lobbyist Association Board of Directors, dedicated to empowering Latinos in the field of government relations. Let's give a warm welcome to Jose.
Hi, everyone. Thank you to APAICS for convening today's Energy Summit conversation around green transportation. My name is Jose Mercado, and I work as Doordash's Manager of Federal Government Relations. As an alumnus of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus Institute, I know firsthand the impact that organizations like APAICS make in the lives of young professionals interested in policy. I mean this when I say it. Doordash values the partnership we have with APAICS, and I appreciate the leadership of Madeline and the rest of the team. At Doordash, our mission is to grow and empower local economies, and that includes all of our stakeholders, from platform users like merchants, dashers, and consumers, to employees like myself, as well as our elected officials and community leaders, investors, and most importantly, the environment. Doordash currently operates in 29 countries across the globe, and our platform boasts 32 million active users per month. Together, we're focused on accelerating local commerce with products and services that support mission growth, consumer access, and people searching for gainful work opportunities. I hope you'll agree with me. Delivery is here to stay, and Doordash is advancing serious efforts to address the climate impact of local delivery. In fact, we're taking bold action to avoid, reduce, and remove emissions from our operations and business model worldwide. Last year, we completed valuable measurements that give us visibility into our entire carbon footprint, serving as a foundation for our global climate strategy and investments going forward. For the second year in a row, we were net zero across our Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions. To achieve this, we invested heavily in clean energy purchases and carbon removal technology to address emissions from our operations and facilities. This includes investments in wind, solar, reforestation, and biochar innovations. We also work with our dashers and incentivize the use of electric cars via leasing discounts and promote the transition to micromobility by subsidizing the adoption of high-quality e-bikes. Last year, over 56 million deliveries on our platform were fulfilled by dashers using a low or no emissions vehicle, resulting in an estimated 37,000 metric tons of avoided CO2. We also continue to improve our batching technology to reduce the distance traveled for orders on our platform. These innovations excite me, especially after knowing what's still to come. In addition to reducing emissions, tackling waste and reducing it is one of our main priorities. We're committed to helping reduce the amount of single takeout containers that unfortunately end up going to landfills. To address this, we invested in large-scale reusable packaging programs, which save money in the long run, attract more consumers, and reduce waste across the planet. We feel good about the early steps we've taken thus far since our first delivery 10 years ago, and look forward to maximizing future opportunities to minimize our impact on the planet. Without a doubt, our approach to transportation centers the environment and prioritizes people and their necessary access to food, essentials, and other vital resources. Through Project Dash, our award-winning social sector initiative, we power deliveries on behalf of food banks, food pantries, and other anti-hunger relief organizations. To date, we've delivered over 90 million meals connected to people experiencing food insecurity. Many families don't have the transportation resources to access charitable food in their communities. However, this effort has helped eliminate some of the greatest barriers that plague and starve our communities. DoorDash is here to help, and responsible green transportation has been critical to that strategy. Thank you for your time and the opportunity to share a bit about the work DoorDash is doing across the globe. And without further ado, I'd like to turn it back over to Madeline to officially introduce this exciting and timely session. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your remarks. Our next panel for the APAICS Energy and Sustainability Summit is entitled Plugged In: Sustainable Transportation Options for the Future. Transportation accounts for 30% of the greenhouse gas emissions produced in the United States. However, recent historic investments from the federal government, some states, and many private companies seek to reduce transportation's environmental impact. This panel sheds light on the additional investments in research, development, and implementation needed to facilitate an effective transition to green transportation that simultaneously improves the mobility of people and goods across the globe. This panel will also discuss obstacles that must be overcome to turn this vision into reality. It's my pleasure to introduce our moderator for this panel, David Kim. David is a transportation executive with WSP USA, a global engineering and professional services firm. In his role as Senior Vice President and Principal, National Transportation Policy and Multimodal Strategy, David works with WSP's advisory national business line, collaborating with senior transportation executives in the public and private sector across the United States. He guides policymaking that supports federal funding for transportation projects anticipated under the bipartisan infrastructure law enacted in November of 2021. Additionally, David served as Secretary of the California State Transportation Agency. He was appointed by Governor Gavin Newsom in April of 2019 and served as Cabinet Secretary until January of 2022. David was responsible for oversight of 40,000 employees across 8 departments, boards, and commissions whose mission is to advance a safe, environmentally sustainable transportation system that maximizes mobility for all Californians. Let's give a warm welcome to David and our panelists.
Thank you very much, Madeline, and good afternoon, everyone. It is truly exciting to be a part of the annual APAICS Energy and Sustainability Summit. I'd like to begin by expressing my thanks to APAICS for asking me to help lead the conversation we are about to have. And I know it's going to be full of good insights as well as very thought-provoking. And just to set the stage, I think many of us are aware of the fact that transportation makes up a huge percentage of overall greenhouse gas emissions in the US, something in the neighborhood of 30%. That is more than any other sector, including the energy industry, as well as agriculture and other sectors. And when you break it down even further, where do the majority of transportation-related GHGs come from? The answer is light-duty vehicles at 58%. That's followed by medium and heavy-duty vehicles at 23%. And just to back up, medium and heavy-duty oftentimes refers to commercial trucks and buses, transit buses. And then there's aviation at 8%. And then finally, you have much smaller percentages from maritime and rail. You know, I've always been fond of saying that those of us who work in transportation have been a major part of the problem for so many years, and we have an obligation to be a big part of the solution. Because if the transportation sector does not step up to the plate and decarbonize enough or quickly enough, we're simply not going to meet our climate goals, and that's a very scary proposition. So that's what we're going to be talking about today, and what are we doing collectively to make progress in moving towards sustainable transportation options? Where are we going? What kinds of obstacles and challenges are getting in the way? What about opportunities? What do they look like in the future? And what does the future hold? Thankfully, we have a group of experts who will help shed some light on where we are and where we're going. What I'm going to do is briefly introduce each of our panelists, and then we're going to dive right into questions. And as you tackle these questions, I would ask all of our panelists to add a bit more about your background and that of your organization. First, we have Washington State Senator Joe Nguyen, who represents Legislative District 34, which is in Seattle. We also have with us Jody Robinson, policy analyst with the Blue Planet Foundation in Hawaii. Additionally, Jumana Master is with us from Delta Airlines. She's in charge of climate strategy and sustainable travel experience, and she's based in Atlanta. And last but not least is Robert Chiappetta from Toyota Motors North America. Robert is Director of Government Affairs and someone I know very well from my time in the auto industry. So that's our speaker lineup. I would now like to ask Senator Nguyen to get us started. Senator, can you briefly tell us what you're focusing on in the legislature to advance decarbonization?
Yeah, thank you so much, David. I'm State Senator Joe Nguyen from the 34th, like I mentioned, in Seattle, and I chair our Environment, Energy, and Technology Committee. I'm also the Vice Chair of Ways and Means as well. We're one of the chief budget writers for our state. And Washington, over the last few years, has been pretty aggressive on climate policies. I'm pretty proud of that work. In the transportation sector specifically, what's interesting is that we have a pretty clean grid, which makes the transportation sector actually a higher percentage of our emissions. It's about 47%. So we've done a lot of policies around a clean fuel standard, acknowledging that a lot of the ports are the causes of emissions. We have done a lot of work on port electrification, specifically on drayage trucks. How do you electrify these very hard to decarbonize industries? And we've done a lot of work around sustainable aviation fuel as well. So acknowledging that it is an important economy for us with Boeing in our backyard, we want to make sure that we are doing it as thoughtfully as possible. And one of the key things that we've passed over the last few years is called the Climate Commitment Act, where it's a program where it's a market-based mechanism that basically, long story short, gives us a ton of money to help us actually transition and decarbonize. And that's been one of the most effective tools that we've had. So that's in addition to a lot of other things as well. But it's been a privilege to serve in this space, just because as somebody who grew up in this area, I remember growing up, there's a river called the Duwamish nearby where I'm from, and it's a Superfund site, so it's heavily polluted. And when my family first came to the United States from Vietnam, they were fishers. They were from a fishing village. And we would go down and fish for food and go crabbing. And I remember being a young kid and being stopped by somebody and saying, hey, you can't eat that shellfish. You can't eat that fish because the water is polluted. And that was, when I was 6 years old. That was one of the first times that I realized the impacts that we as a society have on our environment and the need for us to do a better job. So that informs a lot of the work that I have now in Washington State.
Thanks, Senator. I'm glad you mentioned Port of Seattle, since that's right in your backyard, as well as other industries in your area. And, and you also mentioned 47% of GHGs come from transportation in your area. And yes, it varies from place to place. In California, where I came from, it's something like 50%. So 30% is the national average, but it really varies by region, by state. So I appreciate you mentioning that. Let's go to Jody Robinson. Jody, you have a really unique vantage point as someone on the front lines of advocacy and organizing. And when we talk about green transportation, what do you see as the main obstacles and challenges, especially in Hawaii? What's getting in the way, and how is Blue Planet Foundation tackling some of these challenges?
Thanks, David. Aloha, everyone. I'm Jody. I'm the policy analyst for Blue Planet. Blue Planet's a Hawaii-based nonprofit organization. We work on addressing the climate crisis, and I specifically work on state policies around clean energy, transportation, and climate resilience. Some of the challenges that Hawaii has is very specific to kind of our isolation history and our culture. So we are the most isolated archipelago in the world, essentially. And some of the challenges we have because of that is just the fact that we need to kind of import a lot of our fuel, a lot of our food, even our economy is based on tourism and the military. So a lot of those things kind of contribute to our overall carbon emissions and kind of our ability to address the climate crisis. Another issue we have kind of in Hawaii is just the high cost of living. We have over 50% of families here, which are known as ALICE families. That's acid limited, income constrained, but employed families. So these are folks who are working 2-3 jobs and are still struggling to make ends meet. So a lot of the conversation around transportation and decarbonization is often out of reach for some of these families who are barely making ends meet as it is. And of course, there's a disproportionate impact on Native Hawaiians and Asian Americans, Pacific Islanders in our community. So that's some of the challenges that we're working to address at Blue Planet. And I'll expand further on maybe some of the other questions.
Well, thank you, Jody. I'm so glad you mentioned the acronym ALICE. Asset Limited Income Constrained, and I can't remember the E, but I learned that acronym not too long ago. So thank you for enlightening us. Jumana, you are the lone panelist from the aviation and airline industry. Tell us about your efforts and what Delta Airlines is doing to reduce its carbon footprint, and what kinds of challenges are you looking at when it comes to decarbonization?
Yeah, absolutely. Firstly, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited for this conversation. My name is Jumana Master. I am on Delta's global sustainability team. I focus on road mapping a sustainable travel experience. So specifically, I do this through leading innovation and testing initiatives across the airline. Half of my role is this thing called the Sustainable Flight Challenge. It's a competition with our SkyTeam Alliance, so 22 airlines to try to fly the most sustainable flight possible, considering our entire operation. And then the other half of what I do is making sure we don't just do that once a year, and we're actually learning from all of these testing initiatives and scaling and operationalizing everything that we can. On a personal note, I'm a multicultural second generation South Asian American. I have family all over the world. And so I feel very personally invested in protecting the future of travel. Transportation's environmental impact is undeniable. As you mentioned, that 8% of that 30% impact, aviation's impact on emissions is a global 3% of emissions. And so this is why our biggest opportunity to eliminate our climate impact from flying are the aircraft we fly, how we fly them, and how they're powered. So what we fly, we're strongly invested in revolutionary aircraft. We're working closely with Airbus to develop the industry's first hydrogen-powered aircraft, which is very exciting. We also have a multi-year, multi-market commercial and operational partnership with Joby Aviation to provide home-to-airport transportation. Joby develops all-electric vertical takeoff aircraft. And so these investments reflect the kind of disruptive innovation needed to revolutionize the industry. I recently learned that Joby's actually partnered with Toyota as well to capitalize on a lot of their learning. So always love to hear how all the work is connected. And then I think the second thing is how our aircraft are powered. So sustainable aviation fuel, or SAF, is currently the most important tool we have to decarbonize aviation. SAF has 80% less life cycle emissions than fossil jet fuels. So our goal is to have 10% SAF use by the end of 2030 and 35% by 2035. We're growing the market for sustainable aviation fuel through offtake agreements. I think the biggest challenge there is we're extremely reliant on infrastructure. So on energy infrastructure and having renewables on the grid, and then also the SAF infrastructure that will exist. So also want to say thank you to the great efforts of Senator Nguyen with the legislation that you supported earlier this year to accelerate permitting. It's definitely helping in increasing access to SAF in the market.
All right. Well, thank you, Jumana. Robert, let's go to you. Zero-emission vehicles, electric vehicles are all the rage these days. They are growing in popularity. Sales are going up. But EV adoption is not without its challenges, and there are many challenges. Can you talk about Toyota's perspective on zero-emission vehicles? Why are there so many challenges when it comes to transitioning from internal combustion engine vehicles to electric? And where's this all going?
Well, thanks, David. It's great to be reunited with you here on this call. You are absolutely right. There are a ton of challenges, but I think the industry's up to trying to meet those challenges as best as possible and as quickly as possible. I'm really proud to be with Toyota. I've been with the company about 25 years. When I joined in 98, we were just introducing the Prius in Japan. I believe it came to the US in 99. So for, about 25 years, we've been doing various things to bring electrification to the US market. It's interesting that the panelists that just spoke, we are trying to touch just about everything that was mentioned. Jumana talked about our investment with Joby. We're partners with them in Monterey, California, to manufacture those vehicles that were just described. At the ports, ports were mentioned. At the port in Los Angeles and Long Beach, we've had a so-called portal project in operation for some time, where we're using hydrogen fuel cell vehicles, hydrogen fuel cell semi-trucks to try and figure out how to eliminate carbon in the heavy industry sector. We just announced a couple of weeks ago the creation of a power plant, a hydrogen power plant there, which will produce completely sustainable, renewable hydrogen, water, and electricity for use by those vehicles at the port. And then in Hawaii, interestingly, we partner with our vehicle distributor, Servco, to also provide hydrogen fuel cell vehicles there. And they have a hydrogen refueling station that utilizes water to create hydrogen in a sustainable and renewable way. And so we are experimenting in lots of different places. And the reason is because the challenges are so significant. And we have tried to figure out how to deploy technology in different ways to meet those different challenges. There's really not one size that fits all. We need different applications to try and really make a difference if we want to quickly and efficiently.
Robert, I'm glad you mentioned hydrogen fuel cell vehicles, because a lot of people don't realize that those are electric vehicles. There's obviously battery electric, but hydrogen fuel cell, also electric, zero emission, and the same on the aviation side. So appreciate you mentioning that. All right, let's go back to Senator Nguyen. Let's talk about the role of state versus federal government in the overall effort to decarbonize transportation. As many people know, at the federal level, there is the Inflation Reduction Act, or IRA, also the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, IIJA. Both of them are landmark statutes that make huge investments, and they're playing a huge role in advancing clean transportation. There's also a significant state role that many people may not be aware of. So wondering if you can shed some light on the state versus federal role.
Yeah, if you think about it, most of the climate policies actually happen at the state level. I think the federal government does a lot around funding and helping advance certain causes, but really it's one of those laboratories of democracies that we have to engage in. And at least in Washington state specific, we were fortunate enough to pass a few landmark policies before the CHIPS Act, before the IIJA, before the IRA. And one thing that I've noticed, in fact, a good partnership with the federal and the state, obviously they have way more money than any of the states can potentially have, is leveraging matching dollars. It's knowing that we have partners, not necessarily just within Washington state, but at the federal level as well. So we just mentioned hydrogen. We intentionally put $20 million towards a hydrogen hub application last year. We were just awarded $1.1 billion around those efforts, specifically for hard to decarbonize areas, looking at ports, looking at heavy duty transportation, things like that. So when it comes to being able to decarbonize probably your grid, things like your transportation sector, you have to have a federal partnership on a number of levels. And what I found is we actually have an unfair advantage, and I'm going to exploit that as much as I can. We have a pot of money that's not been used before that we've been able to use as matches for federal grants and been very successful at doing it. So for jurisdictions that are thinking about how you can better, leverage those resources, having some skin in the game definitely works. But one thing that I found myself doing in policies last year was actually more mundane, working on siting transmission lines, working with federal authorities to help speed up these transmission lines that can then handle capacity from renewable energy as well. So the whole gambit requires federal, but also state engagement for it to all work.
Senator, congratulations on the hydrogen hub selection. That is big news. And I heard all about that. And that's a testament to all the great partnerships that you've been able to pull together in the state of Washington. So looking forward to hearing all about that in the months and years to come.
Yeah, thank you.
Jody, you and I talked earlier, and you are a big believer in encouraging greater mode shift. Now, mode shift is one of those technical terms that only people in transportation understand. So I'm wondering if you can explain to the audience what is meant by mode shift and why people should be paying attention to it, and what is your organization doing to advance greater mode shift?
Great. Well, mode shift, it is a technical term, but it really just means about transportation choice and offering mobility options. So here in the United States, we're obviously very car-centric. Mode shift is shifting from these kind of single passenger vehicle car trips to other forms of transportation, whether that's walking, biking, public transit. And I think that provides an incredible opportunity when we talk about decarbonization of the transportation sector. Is it's not just electrifying the existing vehicles we have, but it's also encouraging people to try alternate forms of transportation to overall reduce their emissions and live, a healthier lifestyle. One of the things that Blue Planet is doing is we run the Sustainable Transportation Coalition of Hawaii. This is under the U.S. Clean Cities program under the Department of Energy, and we're one of 70 essential, coalition hubs across the country that's working on addressing transportation emissions. And one of our key core focuses is not just electrification, but it is that mode shift. So we do a lot of community education and empowerment around that. I think specific to Hawaii, because we have, islands, each community is going to have different needs and different challenges to overcome when we're talking about getting people out of vehicles. So really empowering communities to be the leaders and the voices of what their community needs and how we can shift to really improve transportation equity and access throughout our islands.
Thank you, Jody. And one thing I would say a lot when I was transportation secretary in California is that it's not about taking away people's ability to drive a car. But at the same time, we do need to expand mobility options and choices, and as much as we can, reduce our dependence on driving. I know that's not music to the ears of the auto industry, and I used to be part of it. But whether you drive an electric vehicle or an ICE vehicle, a vehicle is a vehicle. And sometimes we need to change that up and travel in ways other than driving a car, whether that means taking transit or rail, walking, biking, that sort of thing. So not to get on my high horse on that, but I just wanted to amplify Jody's point. Jumana, let's go back to you. Air travel is picking up in a pretty dramatic way. I think we've all experienced crowded airports and flights that are at 100% capacity, especially as we approach holiday season. A lot of people in our community are regular or even frequent flyers. And so what does the future look like in terms of sustainable air travel? You touched upon briefly hydrogen-powered commercial aircraft. Do you see that as a substantial part of the future of aviation?
Yeah, absolutely. As I mentioned, we have a partnership with Airbus, and our goal is to have the first hydrogen-fueled airplane out on the market. And being from Atlanta, we hate traffic. We spend a lot of time in traffic. And so, things like our partnership with Joby, and also, as Jody mentioned, mode shift, I think it's important that we're thinking through the entire travel experience and what are all the forms of transportation that we can utilize. So we're really excited about our partnership with Joby and other similar partnerships to have, greener travel and reduce also the time of travel for our customers.
Yeah, that's great. Excellent. Okay, so Robert, let's go back to you. Let's talk about availability and affordability of EVs. A lot of commentators have said and believe that EVs are way too expensive for many consumers, especially lower income folks. So the question is, how can EVs become more affordable? What will vehicle prices look like in the years to come? And what And is there anything you'd like to add when it comes to range anxiety, as well as the availability or lack of availability of charging infrastructure?
So, David, those are all very, very complicated and important issues you're raising. And I think if you look at the EV market this year, for example, right, I think we started in a really, really strong way. Sales were definitely picking up, and interest was strong. Just in the last couple of months and weeks, we're starting to see a bit of a change there, right? I think the amount of time an EV sits on a dealer's lot has been increasing rather significantly recently, and it shows that the EV market is a little uncertain. It's kind of brand new territory for everybody. And we're definitely working through some kinks to try and figure out how best to move forward. Part of the problem is a cost. And, I think, again, this year we've seen a lot of different things happen related to cost. But I think fundamentally, the cost of putting an EV together and bringing it to market is significantly higher than that of an ICE vehicle. We're not quite yet at parity. And so, for families that are on a budget and, trying to stretch their dollar as far as possible, the EV proposition is a tough one to make. The other part that you mentioned is accessibility to charging stations. The federal government did some amazing, significant things this year to try and propel the infrastructure network forward, and it's very much needed. But to get to the levels of market penetration that we're being asked to achieve, we're going to need a lot more, a lot larger of a network, and it's a little uncertain as to how we get there. Toyota has launched in April a new vision or a program called MPACT, which looks specifically at trying to deploy charging stations in underrepresented communities. And so we're just now beginning to find partners and in cities and local areas to try and do that, so that folks who may be currently very far from charging availability can have more access. I think it's going to take time. I think it's not going to be flipping a switch to get everyone to where they need to be. And I think what Toyota has been trying to do is leverage its different technologies to try and bring customers along. We still are strong proponents of hybrids and plug-in vehicles. And part of the reason is because it's a little bit easier, a little bit more practical for folks to utilize those technologies. And it's easier to transition to the next level if you're from, say, hybrid to a plug-in and from a plug-in to an electric vehicle. Now, I think there's concern about the pace, right? We need to get there quickly. But we also need to be mindful of the practical realities. And you don't want to make you don't want to make zero progress. You want to make at least some progress as you move towards a more sustainable transportation sector. I hope that answers most of your question.
Yes, thank you, Robert. And on EV charging infrastructure, you're right. Each of these topics can be a seminar in and of itself, but everyone has heard anecdotes about unreliability of EV charging stations. You drive to an EV charging station, it's offline, or there's a huge crowd, you name it. And obviously the federal government now has standards in place where owners of EV charging infrastructure will be expected to meet certain standards in terms of uptake time and those kinds of things. So that will help. But I think you're right. This is a work in progress, and it's going to be a while before we see a vast network of EV charging infrastructure everywhere. And sorry about that. And it's going to take a while before we have a situation where EV chargers are at every corner, just like gas stations have been for quite some time. All right, so I'm now going to ask a question for any or all of you to answer. What can government and the private sector do to further advance this partnership in our common goal to achieve carbon neutrality in transportation? What's working? What's not working? What are you seeing out there in terms of public-private coordination and cooperation? Senator Nguyen, can I ask you to begin?
Yeah, I'll give you kind of an example. In Washington State, we are kind of known as a battery storage hub. And largely that was due to some investments that were made about 6 years ago in our universities where we bought what's called test beds. So what's interesting is that oftentimes you look at these new technologies, they come out of laboratories, oftentimes in universities, and they're not easy in terms of cost to administer. So the state has made some strategic investments, specifically in battery storage in this case, to help offload some of that risk and offload some of that cost for our industries. And because of that, you now have infrastructure that if you were a private industry going into battery storage, it would take you probably $2 million of investments to have access to certain technologies to test their batteries. But because we paid for that and had it at the university to rent, now you can simply go rent and we actually subsidize some of the costs. So that way it costs you a couple $100 an hour versus tens of thousands of dollars an hour in order to administer some of your research. So part of it is implementing resources at our research institutions who are working on cutting edge spaces for us to be successful. And also, the bill like the SAF bill was very interesting. I tend to be just in general more progressive in terms of my legislative perspectives. That was probably the first time that I saw so many business groups and also climate justice folks come together around policy. And it was to decarbonize the airline industry, right? So there are ways for us to kind of bridge gaps to provide a framework, whether it's political or financial or research, to make these things all go faster.
Thank you, Senator. That's a fascinating coalition behind that SAF bill. Jumana and Robert, you're both in the private sector. Your thoughts on promoting greater or better partnerships between the private sector and government?
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in. I think those partnerships are critical. No one company or entity can achieve long-term sustainability goals alone. Many companies have, a net zero by 2050 goal, and frankly, no company can meet that goal without, critical infrastructure like renewable energy on the grid. And for us, access to SAF. Today, there's not enough SAF supply produced annually to fuel commercial airlines globally for even a single day. So it's really going to take all of us to successfully make this huge infrastructure transition. And some examples of how we get there with SAF, I think long-term federal and state incentives are critical. We're seeing a lot happen on the West Coast and a lot, I think Washington State is definitely leading in that, and we need to see some more on the East Coast. But also mandates without incentives will not guarantee the supply that we need. So we need to see some improvement there, but I definitely echo that it'll take all of us to get there.
Great, thanks. And just as a reminder, SAF stands for Sustainable Aviation Fuel. We all have a tendency to use a lot of acronyms, so it's good to remind folks what they stand for. Robert, any thoughts on your end?
Well, I would agree with what Jumana just said. I do think it's we can't do this alone. The industry is not going to be able to figure out how to move to 100% EV marketplace on its own. It's going to need collaboration and cooperation with the government. I do think that it's important also to try to depoliticize some of what is happening as well. I think there's definitely a lot of a lot happening. There's a lot of, I think, pent up frustration really with where we are and where we need to be, and what has happened so far. And I think there's maybe not enough trust or confidence across the board, and I think we do need to kind of be more aligned in order to not squander resources to get to a higher goal faster and more efficiently. There are obviously differing opinions about how best to do this, but there's also growing data and evidence of what's working and what's not and why. And I think it would be very useful to move away from the politics of all of this and to really focus on how to best utilize our limited resources so that we get moving as fast as possible, because this does need to be addressed as soon as possible.
Thanks, Robert. Good points. Jody, you're right in the middle. You are in the nonprofit sector, so you're not in government and you're not the private sector. Any thoughts, being in the middle, about this partnership between government and the private sector and how we can all work together to advance decarbonization?
Yeah, I think it comes down to something that Robert said, which it is about building trust across stakeholders. And trying to build capacity and coalition. Everything for me is political because I'm a political person and I've been doing this for a while. So I think about systems change and the policy changes that we need to make. But communicating that to individuals and community members and kind of leading to that systemic change does involve collaboration across, nonprofits, private, public sectors, and the government. So we need to come together and addressing kind of this from a holistic perspective on how we can really address the climate crisis in a way that is equitable and just.
All right. Thank you, Jody. Okay, so we have time for 2 more questions. And again, this is open to everybody. What should the AA-NHPI community be excited about when it comes to sustainable transportation options? Or if you've already addressed that, what can we do on an individual basis to reduce our carbon footprint? Senator, would you like to start?
I think it's actually a very exciting time with the developments that we're seeing right now, because we've shifted away from debating climate change to talking about how do we actually address it as fast as possible. And the fact that we have industry, nonprofits, and government here on this panel kind of is a testament to that work as well. And candidly, with Toyota being in Japan, with some other folks around, I think it's really our opportunity as a community to lead on these fronts as well. Because, within the AA and HPI community, we have a great amount of experience in this space, but also every community should be included when it comes to a just transition. And making sure that we're at the table, I think, is probably one of the most effective ways for us to be seen and be heard. And candidly, I actually haven't looked. I don't know if there's any other chairs who are also the environment community chairs who happen to be Asian. But it does help inform a lot of the decision making that I do when we see that oftentimes our communities are in overburdened communities. We see that we oftentimes are housed next to highways and the impacts that it has around our air quality. So when we talk about decarbonization, we're also talking about the health and outcomes of people that we grew up with, that we live with, and it's important for us to keep that perspective in mind as well.
Jody, what should our community be excited about?
Well, here in Hawaii, we have, disproportionate impacts of health, homelessness on Native Hawaiian communities. And a lot of our Asian communities are shift workers that work in, the tourism sector. So I think there's a huge opportunity to kind of address the needs of those specific demographics and communities. Some of the things that I'm excited to work on next session is really improving transportation equity and access at the state legislature. So we're going to be pushing a lot of bills that are going to try and make, EV incentives more affordable for LMI customers. We're going to try and expand our electric bike rebate program and provide some incentives for affordable housing developments to be, EV ready. So that's a huge issue for us, is lack of affordable housing here. So how do we work together to kind of future-proof some of our new construction so that we can adapt to the transition and that it's easier for the folks who are going to live in those kinds of developments. Hawaii is such a special place. I think there's a desire from the people here to kind of improve our self-sufficiency. Pre-Western contact, we were, self-sufficient for over 1 million people, which is about the, same population we have now. So looking at kind of the bigger picture, I think there is some excitement and intentionality around economic diversification so that we can be more self-sufficient here in Hawaii. And a lot of that is reducing our fossil fuel use and our demand and our import economy. So that's kind of an exciting time for us to be here in Hawaii, to be more self-sufficient and to push for climate solutions specific to our local communities and kind of our island specific needs.
Jody, I'm glad you mentioned EV incentives, and that's a whole other topic for discussion. But whether at the state level or the federal level, there are some incentive programs, tax incentives, cash on the hood, those kinds of things. And it really varies from state to state. And of course, there are incentives in the Inflation Reduction Act, although as Robert could probably elaborate on, it's somewhat limited right now. But yes, I'm glad you mentioned incentives for prospective EV buyers. Jumana, what should our community be excited about?
I do want to mention, I feel really inspired to hear that there's legislation moving forward that a lot of corporations were involved in, but also a lot of social justice and environmental justice activists. I think that's really exciting. I think, local communities and local decision making is really important, and there are things that we can all be doing each and every day. And as Jody mentioned, BIPOC communities and low-income communities are most impacted by the climate crisis and therefore need to be part of all of the solutions. And I think you can only be part of the solutions if you're informed. So also want to encourage everyone to keep talking about these things.
Robert, what should people be excited about when it comes to the future?
Look, I really do think this is an exciting time. It is a moment in the automotive industry like few others. I mean, this is a moment of change as maybe significant as the invention of the Model T. And so there's a lot to be excited about. I think, I hope that people remain positive and optimistic as we move forward, because I don't know that it's going to be this straight line graph moving in one direction. And so I'm grateful that, my senior management, whether at headquarters here in the United States or at the parent company in Japan, are very much committed to this future. And, whether we are able to do it in a straight line or not, we will get there. And I think that we need to remain hopeful and positive as we go through these changes.
Great thoughts. Thank you, Robert. Okay, last question. Well, really, it's an opportunity for each of you to share any closing thoughts, final parting thoughts on this very global and grand and important topic. Any final thoughts? Let's start with Senator Nguyen.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for just including us in this conversation. It's an honor to kind of be part of this panel. I think the biggest thing, kind of going back to the hope part, is that there's a lot of investments, there's a lot of energy, and there's a lot of momentum right now in this space to meet our decarbonization targets. So I think the biggest thing is knowing that you can play a key role in this space. I think the audience is largely from industry, but also some stakeholders as well. And what's funny is I met with what's called the Washington Roundtable. It's largely comprised of some of the largest companies in Washington State. Washington State's only about 3% or less than 1% of global emissions, but over 3% if you include the industries that we have. And this was not part of the conversation, but unprompted, they said that a lot of the things that they cared about was around decarbonization. So the fact that this is such an important part of everybody's mind right now, I think is a key part of the success that we'll have in this space.
Yeah, thank you, Senator. Jody, any parting thoughts?
Well, I just want to thank APAICS for inviting us to participate in this panel and really elevating some of the issues facing our AA Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander communities, also inviting Blue Planet. We're a small nonprofit from the middle of the ocean, but very much interested in the discussion and decarbonization of transportation. Here in Hawaii, about 2/3 of our petroleum use is from transportation. So there is a huge need and opportunity and some gaps to address. So we're working as quickly as possible to address those. And I invite anyone interested to please reach out to us on how we can work together to address this huge challenge, but also this huge opportunity that we have. Thank you.
Thank you, Jody. Jumana, any closing comments on your end?
Yeah, thank you so much for inviting me and inviting Delta to this panel. Really enjoyed this conversation. I am leaving feeling incredibly inspired by all the work that's happening on a large scale and kind of moving throughout the country and the world, but also on things that we can do on a small scale. I was mentioning that I've recently started reading Drawdown, and Delta is also involved in the Drawdown Business Compact, and it details all of our all the current climate issues and climate solutions and things that we can do every day to make a difference. So thank you for everyone on here for all of the great work that you're doing, and also feeling inspired for things we each individually and with our communities can do every day.
Excellent. Thank you, Jumana. Robert, closing comments, thoughts, musings.
Thanks so much, David and APAICS for this convening. Toyota's thrilled to be a part of this conversation and to be a part of this effort too. This is a big issue, obviously, and a very difficult one. And I appreciate APAICS taking some time to think about how this issue relates to the AAPI community specifically, and what can be done. And so, we are committed to being a part of bringing solutions to bear, and we look forward to working with APAICS and other partners to see a better reality. So, thank you, David, and again, thank you, APAICS, for convening us all.
Well, this has been a stimulating, interesting, thought-provoking conversation. We've only scratched the surface. We can keep going a few more hours if you'd like, but we will not do that. We will call it a close. And I just want to thank all of you for being a part of this conversation, lending your expertise and your perspectives. Big thanks to Senator Nguyen, Jody, Jumana, Robert, and thank you to APAICS for hosting this important dialogue and conference, and for the opportunity for all of us to be here today. And so with that, thank you all. Have a great day, and we will continue this conversation at another time. Thanks.
Thank you.
Mahalo.